Hi, Amy.
Awesome.
Hi, Amy.
Hi, Bill. How are you? Let's see. Great to see everybody. Yay, people are coming in. I am going to share my screen for a second. Oops. Or not. Welcome, everybody. Great to see so many people here. Sorry. And I am having trouble sharing my screen. Sorry about that.
No, we can see it, but is it in present mode yet?
Right, that's what exactly, that's what I'm trying to do.
Okay.
All right, let's see. Thanks, Sarah.
No problem. It happens to me all the time. I'm like, nobody can see this, and everybody's like, I can see this. I just see it inside there.
Awesome. Okay.
Amy, you just want to open that up again and go down below. It's about the 5th icon in a row that shows a picture of a movie screen. When you click on that, it will go into presentation mode.
All right, right. How's that? Did that work?
You're not sharing yet.
Oh, well, then it worked for me. I think one of the challenges is that you can't see both things at the same time. You can't see your slide deck and your screen of people. So that makes it a little tricky, but we're going to figure it out. So look, you have a slide, right? Great. Welcome. So I guess I will get started then, since things are working at this moment. That's always exciting. We're so grateful for all the presenters who are here. I know so many people in the audience are here because they care deeply about this topic and are wanting to help. And that is just so amazing and rewarding. At Worcester Addresses Childhood Trauma, one of our goals is to really help create a trauma-informed community. We want people to understand how trauma looks behaviorally, what it does to your relationships, and we hope that understanding that will give people more empathy and patience and kindness, because those are the things that really heal and help. So thank you for participating in this. Just in terms of housekeeping, we have a number of presenters today. We're going to try to go fairly quickly. It looks like it's already great, but if you could please mute yourself if you're not speaking, that will help us. A lot of times background noise can be really hard to manage and distracting. Initially, we'd love to have you use the chat to just introduce yourself so we know who's here today. And we are also going to have questions. If you have questions, you can put them in the chat. Each speaker, though, is going to be able to decide if they need to leave early, if they want to take the questions in that moment, or if they want to hold them to the end. I am going to just give you the overview of the agenda on the next slide, so you'll know who's talking about what. I'm sure people have, questions related to a specific aspect of it, so it'll be good for you to know what's coming. Mary Robbins, I believe, will be here to help me monitor questions in chat, because it can be a challenge. I'm not going to take the time to go through speaker bios, just because of time. And I'll put them up on the slide. We can post them on the Facebook page, because we want you to recognize we have some amazing expertise here. I'm thrilled. But you know, it takes a long time to say all the amazing things they do. This is being recorded. It's also live right now. When we have the link come back from Clark, we'll share that link out. It's free for everyone to use. We would love to have you use it and share it widely. So in addition, presenters may decide they want to share their slide decks, but they're all embedded in here. And our recording that we get from Clark allows you to really see all the pieces of it, the slide decks, the notes. So hopefully that'll be really helpful to you as well. Just to kind of give you the overview, Sarah's here. She's going to be like, I'm going to kick it right on over to her. She's a professor at WPI. She's been doing this work for a long time. She's going to kind of give us the overview of what the classifications are, what kind of rights and responsibilities people have. Karen Clark-Hoey is also here. She's a social work professor. She's worked with this population extensively. She is going to talk more about sort of the mental health needs that rise up. And then most importantly, we have a big chunk on Afghan culture. And we have Mona and Somaya here to do that. And I know that's probably going to be where people have the most interest and questions. We do have Dr. Bersani, who works for the federal government, who is going to be able to give us sort of that high level overview, what's going on right now. And then we have attorney Melanie Shapiro and our own Noreen Johnson-Smith to talk about what's going on right now locally and how you can plug in to help. So sort of the big overview of the situation, focusing on the culture, and then real specifics. That's how we've laid it out, so that hopefully that helps you think about when your questions will be there and when to form them. I'm just going to quickly do a quick reminder about trauma. I know that many people in this audience come to Trauma Training Tuesday all the time, and they know a lot about trauma at this point, which is thrilling to me. But we also have a lot of new people that might not know some of the really important pieces. Trauma, psychological trauma, is something that overwhelms you, makes you feel out of control, like your place in the world is uncertain. We can really, it's not hard to see that everyone who's come from Afghanistan to this country is in trauma. One of the things about trauma, when you're in it, it looks different than when you're on the outside of it, when you've been able to leave it behind. Most of our conversations, we hear a lot and talk a lot about post-traumatic stress disorder. That's because until you get to sort of relax and take a deep breath, that's the only time you're going to be able to process. You can't make sense of what's going on around you while it's going on around you. We would expect that most of our newcomers are going to be in their active fight, flight, freeze, fawn, devalue. They're going to be in active stress. So that could look like people that are irritable, argumentative, ready to, like, just frustrated. It can look like people that are really shut down and not able to be responsive, not having the kind of responses you might expect. People can really try to just sort of make themselves small, go along with the program, just be placating to try to get through this stressful time. So we'll likely see all of these things. Trauma impacts pretty much everything about you and your place in the world, particularly how your mind is working. You kind of lose IQ points when you're in active trauma. You're not able to think or focus or concentrate. So when we're in situations where we're giving people all kinds of information and we have expectations of things that they should do, and then they're not doing that, please understand that's not about defiance or anything other than overwhelm, inability to just comprehend all of that. When people are in crisis, they cannot stop thinking about the traumatic content, or they correct, overcorrect, and do everything to avoid thinking about it. I have this picture of the record here because that to me is the best analogy. If you're, 40 plus, 50 plus like I am, you remember vinyl records. And when they got a skip in them, that piece, that phrase would be repeated, 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 repeated. They'd be stuck. That record needle would be stuck there. If you didn't want to get stuck there, and you knew you would, you had to pick that up and go way around, way avoid it. That's how our brain manages trauma. We're either so stuck in it, we're in that hole, or we're working so hard to not fall in the hole that we're organizing our life around that. It causes you to be dysregulated. You really just can't keep your emotions in check when you're in stress and in trauma. It's hard to recognize options. Your confidence is absolutely impacted. One of the big reasons we're doing this work at Worcester Addresses Childhood Trauma is because when you're in this space, bad things continue to happen. You're not bringing your best self to the situation. You miss things, you forget things, you fall down, and you just get further and further marginalized. That's what I mean by people get re-victimized. When you don't know who to trust, you trust everyone or you trust no one. And both of those things have consequences. So just being aware of that. And the cultural pieces. All of us have multiple identities. We belong to specific culture. We have a racial identity. We have a gender identity. Our sexual orientation is part of our identity. And that means we're all pretty complex. These things all interact, and they interact in ourselves and with each other. And it's important to be mindful of that because there's no sort of one size fits all to this. Everyone has really unique constellation of things about them that they're bringing to every interaction. And so things are going to look different for different people. One of the things about these identity groups in our country, in our culture, they're not all equally valued. We know that if you're female, if you're a person of color, if you have a non-Christian identity, all of those things are afforded less power in our society, in our American culture. And that's important to know. People are tuned into that. We know that. Many people have been taught to be suspicious of people outside of their culture, and vice versa. So we can expect to see some sort of wrong ideas, stereotypes, mistaken assumptions. So it's important to just try to put that in the front of your mind. The saying is, be curious, not judgmental. If you're seeing pieces that don't make sense to you, ask about them or learn about them. Try not to be judgmental, especially that's why I felt like it was so important to do this Trauma Training Tuesday. We know we're getting bombarded with information that has real clear biases, information that wants us to come to a specific conclusion. And we want to give people good, accurate information that's actually going to help them and not cause them to be more fearful or more suspicious. We want to create open kindness, dialogue, all of that stuff. And then I just want to say this stuff is triggering. It's triggering for us. It's triggering for our new arrivals. When triggers come up, please do the best you can to take care of yourself. We completely understand that. And they're triggers because you don't see it coming. You don't expect it. It just happens. That's the space where a lot of times we see reactions that are troubling to us. People get triggered. We get triggered. And these things affect relationships. And again, this chart is about the fact that it's post-traumatic stress disorder. Right now, we're not going to see any of these sort of pieces. We're going to see people in active stress. This is coming, but not just yet. And I just want to also remind us that vicarious trauma is real. Thinking about, hearing about, feeling about these experiences that other human beings are having are absolutely bound to impact us. It's hard to sort of listen and understand without having some of those traumatic symptoms yourself. So please just recognize that, take care of that, know that as you do that, this is the risk you're taking. It's very real. It impacts so many areas of your life and really causes decreased life satisfaction. So we just want you to be aware of what you may be going through, what our visitors may be going through from a very general Trauma 101 perspective. And because of that, also, hopefully we can manage our expectations. I know that people in trauma are always beating themselves up that it's taking so long for them to feel better or do better. It takes some time. When you've been in trauma for 3-4 years, it's not going to resolve in a month. So it's just important to be as kind and patient with ourselves and each other as we can. All right, I am going to stop my screen share, I think. Stop it and turn it to Sarah. And I think I'm not doing too bad for time, 2 minutes too much, but
totally good. Thank you
all
so
right.
much. Yay.
So Sarah, you and stop my video and turn it over to you.
All right, and we're going to do the same little dance that we did with Amy. Hopefully, can I get a thumbs up that people can see this? Yeah, all right, excellent. This is going to be a very quick primer today, just an overview to get some definitions down, to get some clarity. And just so you all know, I'm coming from 10 plus years of work in Eastern Pennsylvania around refugee resettlement that I did prior to coming to WPI. So this is where some of my, I'm not going to say expertise, but just experience comes from. So if I leave you with just 3 things for today, I want to make sure that you're leaving thinking about this work as asset-based and trauma-informed. And those responses to welcoming our new neighbors is essential for community strength, keeping you all sustained, keeping our new arrivals also feeling belonging and like their well-being is being prized and focused. Resettlement is a many hands on deck effort. There are stakeholders with a lot of different talents and a lot of different motivations. So open communication, transparency, compassion, coordination amongst all of you is very, very crucial. And then finally, this developing skill sets and mindsets of ethical community engagement, specifically around resettlement, working with vulnerable populations, is important and an ongoing process. So stay open to learning. We're helping build capacity with our community and ourselves, but it doesn't end today. We're going to have a good overview, but there's more to come. So just to place right in front of us a definition from the get-go about what a refugee is. So there are a lot of words that are out there. People sometimes conflate them, use them interchangeably, but really reminding ourselves that a refugee is a legal status and a definition denoted by international law and by our U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. So it is any person who outside of any country of their person's nationality, or in the case of somebody who doesn't have a nationality, is outside the country in which they last habitually resided, and usually for reasons that are coming from violence, from war, from fear of persecution. And it's well-founded and it is documented and folks have gone through a process. There are other concepts and definitions that are related but not the same. So internally displaced people. So sometimes you'll hear about folks who have migrated to a different part of their country that is safer to escape that same persecution, but they haven't left their border yet. An asylum seeker is somebody who has already come to that place that they think that they're going to be resettled or they can find home or shelter for a bit, but they've already reached that land and they haven't gone through the refugee process. And then you'll hear probably more later about this idea of being a humanitarian parolee. So humanitarian parole can be granted to any individual who has a compelling emergency. So it might not be through the refugee resettlement process, but many of the same markers apply to those folks who are seeking humanitarian parole and sponsorship by someone within their resettlement country. And so what is resettlement? The process that you all are going to be supporting. It is the selection and transfer of refugees from a country in which they have sought protection to a third country. So this differs from the asylum process where individuals have reached the United States and are granted protection. Resettlement can be a very long and arduous process where folks are in the system for a very long time, separated from their families. They might be in camps. On average, a couple of years ago, it was 18 to 24 months. But as you know, in the our most recent, prior to this current administration, refugee acceptance within the United States dialed down to nearly zero. So this has gotten a longer and longer wait. And so how do refugees get to the United States? They're usually referred through the UN High Commission for Refugees. There is a responsible agency within the US, our Department of State's Bureau of Population, Refugees and Migration, and Resettlement Support Center across the United States that help work through this intense screening process, lots of background checks, health checks. USCIS will do all reviews of applications, conduct in-person interviews, health screening. So the takeaway from all of this, it is a rigorous vetted process. The resettlement support centers then get sponsorship assurance from agencies like Accentria and like others who are on this call that provide assistance and support. Some of our Lutheran services, Catholic charities, a variety of different agencies who have been entrusted with this really difficult effort. And then the International Organization for Migration facilitates departure from camps to the US. I won't belabor this, but this is just, if you ever want a quick snapshot to show somebody all of the pieces of the vetting process, I think this is a really effective way of showing just how much goes into that process. And I won't show this today, but I will share the slides out and you can watch this TED Talk about what it means to be a refugee. It's got some good, compelling, I don't want to start that, nope. Good, compelling stories that I think are helpful to understand. So once folks have arrived, they have 90 days of funding from the US government and various agencies, in our case, to do all of these things to try and get self-sufficient. It is a huge task. There's school enrollment for families, language classes. Some folks are fluent in English, some are learning from the very get-go. They need to secure a job, insurance, places to live. Many are without transportation. Some folks drive, some folks don't. So one thing to take away from this is just the enormity of the task ahead. The other thing to take away is the fact that everybody's starting at a different space. So as Amy talked about, they all have trauma and they're all sharing in that experience. But in terms of, you know, what job they had in their previous home, how fluent they are in English, what are their kind of expectations of what America is and what the United States and specifically the Northeast United States, there's a lot there that they're trying to process through and a lot where you need to meet the person where they are and not have like an assumption of what you're going to be working with. And these challenges, as I mentioned, acclimation, meeting physical needs, homesickness, the trauma of war or past experiences, economic uncertainty. Some folks might have been very comfortably employed and solid and are used to being the caregiver and provider for their family. And now they're in this space where they're might be relying on someone else. There's also still active persecution and violence in the new home. There's misunderstandings about who refugees are. There are misunderstandings about what motivations are for coming here. There's suspicion. So there's the trauma of interpersonal distrust. And sometimes there's mistaken identities. In my past life, when we worked in Pennsylvania, we had one of our neighbors who was mistaken for a gang member and was unfortunately killed. You know, I won't talk about that today, but there's just all of these things that you don't anticipate. And that's just one of the many of keeping people safe as well. And then the changing family structure. Not everybody came over as a whole family. Some folks are still waiting for family members. And who supports all the folks on this call? Resettlement agencies, government social services, nonprofits, faith communities, civic organizations, local businesses, volunteers, folks who are professionals who can give in-kind donation of their time or pro bono work to be able to get folks settled and thriving. And the agency that you'll be working with are handling a lot of these backbone pieces. So case processing, the legal ramifications, employment services, immigration, unaccompanied minors if folks are coming over and their children without parents or without a guardian. So there's a lot happening here. And you might ask yourself, well, where do I fit into all of this? As more folks are coming, it's going to be overwhelming for the agencies. So following the lead of the folks who are at this kind of frontline response and hearing what they need and providing that support is essential. Not coming in and saying, I have an idea, because everybody has an idea. Everybody on this call has a good heart, but listening to the folks who really know it up front is going to be essential. All right, so what are some of the things that you can do? First, educate yourself. Coming to things like this, continuing to learn, read online from reputable resources like the International Rescue Commission and Council, UNHCR, other offices through the federal government. doing that research to get a good understanding so you can talk comfortably about this work. Again, follow the lead of the experts. Volunteers in ways that are organized and invited by the resettlement agency or the larger network. Ask, don't tell. I've had this instance in the past where I've had motivated colleagues who are like, well, I gathered up all my clothes and I just want to give it to the organization. And the organization doesn't have space, doesn't have a process to be able to accept the clothes. It ends up being a larger burden on the institution when you're doing stuff that is kind of unsolicited, well-meaning, but unsolicited. So just, asking, practicing humility, and then also knowing your role to correct misconceptions. And so again, here are some of the services that you can provide. I mentioned a second ago, but I'll skip over to this one really quickly. Correcting misconceptions stems directly from that educating yourself. You can tell the folks who might be skeptical in your neighborhoods, might be on the fence, might be aggressively anti-refugee. The folks are here under a legal status that's determined by international law. They are the most highly vetted individuals who are coming to the United States. They have contributed historically in economic, intellectual, cultural, civic ways, in important ways, in ways that have made our country better. Refugees rarely stay on public assistance past their initial resettlement period. Folks are hardworking and they want to not necessarily completely adapt, but they want to be good neighbors and they're motivated by that. And refugees have experienced great trauma and should be afforded the same compassion and understanding that anybody gets when they adjust or heal. I think you heard that in Amy's talk really loud and clear, but I get cranky if I'm hungry. Like I can't, all of these different traumas and pieces that people are holding, you can afford them latitude to be getting used to Worcester or New Hampshire or figuring out where they're comfortable here. And some services that you can provide. You can be the transportation. You can drop people off for doctor's appointments. You can be a buddy for language practice. You can offer to watch some kiddos for a little while somebody has an appointment or goes for a job interview. You can be on the lookout for good jobs that folks could apply for. You could be a provider of temporary housing, good services, financial resources, and being that advocate. That last point there too, I just want to highlight because we've got some fantastic government officials who care deeply about this and support this effort. And oftentimes, you write a letter when you're really teed off about something or excited about something. It's equally important to write thank you letters and letters of support for what's happening and going on. Let me just check my time. I want to make sure that I don't encroach too much. So some difficult truths that we all kind of have to face in this work. Folks might have seen horrors that we cannot and hopefully will never understand or experience fully. So we can listen, we can bear witness, we can support, but we're not going to fully understand. And trauma can be present in so many ways with different needs to address. Like I said, meeting every person at where they are. Folks will be grateful to be safe, but do not expect lauds and overwhelming gratitudes your way. It might come, that's lovely. But do not expect or come into this expecting a lot of thank yous because it's a lot and it's a huge process. Folks could be skeptical of you. They could be critical of their current situation. It could be very different than what they're used to. They could be resentful of the US government for the situation we're in. There's a lot to unpack there. So just be aware of that. And like I said, experiences of identity are contextual. They come up in different and interesting ways that you have to stay attuned to. And again, this isn't about you and it's not about me. It's about, and we have good intentions, but sometimes what we feel is right or best isn't the best thing for the people that we're working with. So staying open to the experts that you're working with and listening to community voice first and foremost. Right. And so a couple of last points before I move on. Values and partnership. Make sure that you're keeping trauma informed in kind of the front view. We want to make sure that we're having these relationships that are built on trust. So transformative reciprocity, as folks get more comfortable sharing a meal together, asking good questions about, and not triggering questions, but questions about what are you most proud of? What are you excited about? Tell me a little bit about X. Having that cultural exchange and that opportunity to be with people as people is important. Making sure that anything we're doing is for the larger empowerment and agency of the folks that we're working with. Being honest and authentic and practicing compassion, and also be willing to hear critical feedback and reflection. I like to think I'm doing the right thing all the time, but I'm always learning, and I'm always learning there are new and different things that I didn't anticipate. So staying open to that and caring for yourself is important in this work too. And many of you have heard of this concept before, but trying to avoid at all costs this white savior complex, this idea that like we as Americans, as Westerners, as white people, as middle class people, as upper middle, whatever that station we are in this world, it does not automatically entitle us to the ability to speak what's best for the folks who are coming here and who are new arrivals. It doesn't do us any good to swoop in and look like the superhero. This is partnership work. This is good work together. And you really want to just be cognizant of the things that you might be projecting through this work. I know, for instance, people always want to take pictures, post pictures on Facebook. That could be a danger actually to people back home. So you might have a picture of new arrivals at the airport, which seems beautiful on its surface, but what happens if that photo then runs? It goes into the newspaper. It gets back to families that are left behind Afghanistan, and then it could be possible further persecution for the family that's left behind. So just thinking through some of those, always check, what are my motivations? Is this going to be a good thing? And we can have more resources on that too. So I will close up because I know I'm at time, but like I said, if I leave you with 3 things, this asset-based trauma-informed responses to welcoming our new neighbors, crucial. Many hands on deck, but you got to stay open, transparent, practice compassion, and coordinate with one another. And then finally, developing those skill sets and mindsets. This is one of many touch points for education for you all. And we're going to, and for me too, I was learning as I was putting the slide deck together, just reminding and refreshing myself. So just being open to that and knowing that there's going to be constant opportunity to keep developing those skill sets is really key and normal and totally normal. So I will answer any questions in the chat. I believe I'm kicking it over to Karen now, but thank you all so much for having me here today.
That was awesome, Sarah. Thank you so much. Love it.
Thank you. Thank you.
It looks like you did. If you have a minute to take questions, Caitlin wanted to know what you meant by asset-based.
Yes. So in community engagement work, we're so often looking at like, what are the problems? What are the global grand challenges? Is it poverty? Is it hunger? And right, those are all structural problems. But when you go into communities and you're working alongside of communities, if you're only focused on the negative and you're only talking about the community as a problem, it wears on everyone. So trying to, affirm everybody has skills and talents, that we're looking at this from an asset-based way. We're leveraging those assets. What do we love about Worcester? What can we do more about Worcester? What do we love about our new neighbors? What are we honoring in them? It just makes the work so much deeper and more positive, and less traumatizing in the end. So, and I've got charts and everything, so I'm happy to share those too.
We'll have you back, or we might have more time at the end. So, because that was amazing, and I know you have so much more. But you. Karen, I'm going to kick it on over to you.
Thank you very much, Amy. Hello, everyone. My name is Karen Clark, and I am going to apologize that I'm not going to be showing any PowerPoints. I have no slides prepared. I just completed 3 hours of teaching, and I'm just going to speak from my experience. I'm realizing that I am followed by Mona, Ives, and Somaya Rajai, who really much more appropriately will be able to address the issue of mental health within a cultural context. And I want to make sure that they have all of the time that they'll need to do that. But just by way of background, so I come from, I'm a social worker. I loved hearing what Sarah had to say about being where our clients are at. So those of you who will be on the front line and offering direct services to our Afghan newcomers, being where they're at is just really well put. And you can do that, right? We live in an age when we have abundant access to information, real-time information. We need to be critical. We need to know what those news sources are. But we're able to really equip ourselves with information and knowledge about what the circumstances are related to the individuals coming. My understanding, and anybody on this call can correct me if I'm wrong, is that this group are individuals. So I've been working with refugees since the mid 1990s, when I lived and worked in Washington, D.C., and I worked for the Conference of Catholic Bishops, which you probably have never heard of. But the Conference of Catholic Bishops it's kind of like the headquarters for the Catholic Church in the United States. It is the organization that oversees resettlement through all of the Catholic charities offices around the country. So it's the largest resettlement network, not so much here in Worcester, but true in terms of, the national picture. They have about 20, that used to be 27% of the pie. We all know that this refugee field, the resettlement field, has been really decimated following the previous administration. I have concerns about the current capacity. We have certainly lost capacity to resettle in the United States. But going back to that work in Washington, D.C., it's actually sort of ironic that I now live in Massachusetts, in Worcester, that I didn't know I would be living in Worcester. And I lived in Washington, and I would travel around the country to conduct program evaluations, program assessments. And I had all of New England. So I would come to Boston, I would come to Worcester, and I would on each visit, I would return to Washington and I would say, we need to resettle more refugees in Worcester. We need to stop resettling in Boston. It's too expensive. There's abundant capacity in Worcester. And that was back in the 90s when we were resettling Afghanis who were displaced by the Taliban. So these are individuals who are still, refugees who are living in neighboring countries, who are refugees by definition, that they have crossed a border. So the vast majority are in Pakistan, and there's as many as 2.5 million. But my understanding is that this current effort is primarily focused on those Afghans who have been evacuated from Afghanistan by the U.S. government. And that, there are about 120,000 individuals who have been given what's called a special immigrant visa. And again, anybody here can correct me if my understanding is not, I don't by no means need to imply that their needs or their exposure to violence, that their level of trauma is any different than a refugee who had to actually get themselves across the border. But my understanding is that these are individuals that we're focusing on now and who are coming in now are special immigrant visa holders who have been given access to all of the benefits that an individual coming in with refugee status would have. So just in terms of migration, there is no refugee or special immigrant visa holder who has not experienced trauma. The loss of home is traumatic. The prolonged exposure to violence, the prolonged sense of living in limbo with uncertainty, knowing that knowing that there are things that are outside of your control, that you see individuals that are there one day and not there the next day, and you don't know if they're alive or if they were able to somehow cross into a country and be safe. The majority, I would say, vast majority of these 123,000 individuals are going to be in a state of dire longing for their loved ones, because they're individuals, so special immigrant visa holders are individuals who have some tie to the U.S. government. They would have been working with the U.S. government during the 20 years that we were present in Afghanistan. And so they are very limited with who they're able to bring in at this point. They could certainly file, and I think there's someone on the call who is going to speak to the legal immigrant paperwork and what rights they have. But who they are eligible to apply for. So it's, thank you, Sarah. That loss of home is significant. The exposure to violence, the prolonged state of limbo, the feeling of betrayal. There's issues with regard to the way that these individuals feel about the United States government, and the very, very short notice that we have given to the Afghan people in August when we decided to leave after 20 years. And the very predictable and rapid response of the Taliban in seizing control of the country. So there are issues that are important for individuals who are working with these newcomers to understand that there are feelings of betrayal toward the U.S. government. And like I said, a very important sense of longing for the loved ones that they left behind, because they are likely only coming with their nuclear families. So it's important for you to know that, yes, every refugee and every person who has experienced displacement has experienced some degree of trauma. It doesn't mean that they all have PTSD. PTSD, interestingly, is more likely to develop in those individuals who have, it's after they arrive. It is after arrival. It's a post-migration phenomenon. It's the post-migration stressors that they're exposed to that lead to complex trauma. And those are things like dissonance, right? Cognitive dissonance. So the difference between, what I thought I was going to see, what I thought I was going to get when I arrived in the US, and what I'm actually getting. So that the difference between the disparity between what I thought I was going to get and what I'm actually getting, leads to a sense of disappointment, certainly, anger, certainly. And we saw this in the Afghan individuals that we resettled back in the 90s. Many of those cases were widowed women or women whose husbands had been recruited, hijacked by the Taliban. And so they were resettled, and often they were very, very large families, so women with dependent children. And the expectation on the part of the resettlement agency that they be working within 90 days of arrival is sometimes not realistic. In fact, it's not. It's not realistic. And just to put that into perspective, it's important to say that we are at 90 days now where we say you need to have developed some sense of self-sufficiency because there's no funding coming from either the State Department pays for the first 30 days, and then it's the Office of Refugee Resettlement that covers the remaining period of time. There are grants that can extend support to families up to 6 months or 180 days after arrival. But that's the perspective I want to give you, that this used to be a resettlement program that provided families with the support to be able to receive cash assistance through the refugee program for 6 months. I mean, when the refugee program began, it was, back in the 70s with the resettlement of the Southeast Asians, and it was 5 years of assistance that they received. And that's very telling. It's very telling because it's known that is realistic. That is a realistic amount of time that it takes for individuals to adjust to life in this country. I'm watching the time. I probably can wrap up in a few minutes. There's going to be a honeymoon period. It's about a year, it could be less, but the honeymoon period ends. And you'll be experiencing individuals who, again, dire concerns for the loved ones they've left behind, so they'll want to see action with respect to filing the paperwork. Their expectations around how long that will take need to be very directly communicated so that they don't have false hope and unrealistic expectations. The complex trauma that they experience when they come is, looking at issues around housing, housing insecurity, financial instability, comparative poverty, living in circumstances that they may not have experienced back in Afghanistan, not knowing if they can make ends meet on their own. These fear of expressing their religious beliefs, know where all of your mosques are, know where all of your Islamic cultural centers are, make contact with them. I am going to let the speakers following me, Mona and Somaya, speak directly to, within a cultural context, speak directly to depression and anxiety, what that looks like, PTSD, what that looks like. I'll close with two final things. I think information sharing is so important, and I just love that Amy is doing this, and I love that Amy invited me to speak. Thank you, Amy. Two resources I'm going to type into the chat. One of them is called Bridging Refugee Youth and Children's Services, which is, I'll type the website into the chat. It's an incredible organization. It's based in DC. It's a hub of information sharing for all individuals working with refugees, and particularly the needs of refugee children. And then also the Office of Refugee Resettlement, which is the office that is in the Department of Health and Human Services. I'll share that link as well. Hi, Somaya. Hi, Mona.
Hello.
And then the last thing that I will say is cultural orientation is so key, and we don't emphasize it enough. And I have spoken with Somaya about how, as a student obtaining her MSW at Springfield College, we will work together to develop cultural orientation programs with the Refugee Immigrant Assistance Center around systems, big systems that are very, very difficult to navigate, but very, very important to know, including child welfare. If I didn't say that again, child welfare, and education, and law enforcement, and healthcare. So those four big systems, and it's not just a 30-minute sit down, here's what you need to know. It's an ongoing discussion over the course of time. Very important that we not overload with information at the outset as soon as they arrive. And then I just love what you said, Amy, about empathy, patience, and kindness. And so I'm going to echo that and end there. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much, Karen. That was great. All right, here we go. I know you guys are going to knock this out of the park. Thank you so much, Somaya and Mona.
Let's hope we can live up to your expectations. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for having us today. We are going to talk a little bit about understanding Afghan culture. So first, just quick intros. I know that these were already done and they're in the chat, but just a little bit about Ansaar of Worcester. So we're actually a nonprofit agency that we founded back in 2017 to more broadly address the needs of refugees, immigrants, and otherwise underserved people in the Worcester community. And our focus areas are charity, education, social integration, and increasing access for refugees to different existing programs and services in the community. So I'm always trying to learn about offering, services that we can offer to refugees of all types. Ansaar of Worcester doesn't focus only on Afghans. We actually service people from basically all over the world. And I'd like to turn it over to Somaya to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Somaya Rajai. I'm currently completing my MSW at Springfield College. I should mention Dr. Clark is my professor and my advisor. And I am doing my third year internship at RIAC. RIAC is a community-based nonprofit grassroots human service agency that provides comprehensive service to refugees, asylees, and immigrants, as well as the largest community. Our service include refugee resettlement, counseling, outreach, and education, and other social services. So here's the good stuff about Afghan. In Afghanistan, different languages commonly are spoken. It's mostly Pashto and Dari. Afghanistan has multi-ethnic and tribal society, which are Pashto, Tajik, Hazara, Uzbek, and others. Most Afghan can read Arabic because we read Quran. Because of war and shortage of medical treatment, Afghans migrate to Pakistan. So a lot of Afghans speak Urdu, and thanks to Bollywood, Afghan can understand Hindi and Urdu as well. Afghan can also speak other language fluently or at the beginner level. People practice their religion differently and have different point of view of Islam. There is generational division of how quickly adapt to contemporary US style should happen. Of course, younger generation are more ready to change, to adapt to their environment, but their parents and grandparents need more time.
Okay, so I want to say thanks to Sarah for mentioning this earlier. I'm going to contextualize it a little bit more. As we've been working with refugee populations, for years now, more than 5 years, we are seeing this trend come up, especially with folks who don't have a lot of background or experience working with refugees or immigrants. Thankfully, a lot of folks from agencies and different academic backgrounds have a little more experience, so we don't see these problems as much. But usually it's those excited, sort of zealous volunteers who are like, I'm so excited to show my support to my Afghan neighbor, that kind of tend to sometimes step into a little bit of a problem with this. So, I guess this sounds a little negative, but I just want to apologize to you guys in advance if this sounds negative. But what I wanted to emphasize is be careful of language that you use with folks, which appears to be saving them from their own lifestyle, culture, or choices. That takes away their agency, and it also can be just plain offensive. Any implication that we as Americans are more free. So it may be that, the political situation in Afghanistan is as a certain way, and that may be an objective fact that as Americans, we possess more freedoms or more rights at this very moment in time than these refugees do. But to imply as such, it can really hurt the ego. It can hurt the feeling of pride in their own country or their own background or ethnicity. So we should really avoid talking about how we're free now. Just to give you an example, I am not of Afghan background, and I was born in the United States. I was educated in the United States, and I'm very fluent in English. But as I travel around, simply because I have a headscarf on, I can tell you many, many times I've been approached by random strangers who I don't know, who've told me, honey, you're in America now, you're free, you can take that off. And, it's a very, I'm not saying this is the attitude you would get from people who work with immigrants, but it's a very common sentiment. And sometimes it's not expressed verbally. It can be expressed just by your facial expressions, your body language. So just keep in mind any kind of implication that you're not free. It can be hurtful. Be aware of the different perceptions. As Somaya mentioned, she mentioned that different generations have different attitudes towards, I put in quotation marks, westernizing, or just adapting to life in a Western country in different ways, socially. Some people may perceive this as something exciting and fun that they can't wait to do. And other people may perceive it as something bad that they need to avoid and protect themselves and their families from. I think a couple other people mentioned that, there are different views about the Americans and American involvement in Afghanistan. So keep that in the back of your mind when you're speaking. Just be cautious and avoid kind of stepping into that pitfall. Another thing is to always exchange. I think other people mentioned this as well. Exchanging your culture, sharing, and asking other people about their culture shows them that you respect them and that you respect their integrity as an Afghan people. I know Sarah said this, and I know Amy said this, and everybody said this. Karen said this: respect people where they are. People are coming to you at a certain point. Don't look at how you're going to help them adapt. One of the pitfalls people fall into is that they believe that in order for people to grow and succeed in America, whether that be financially, socially, whatever the case may be, that they need to abandon certain aspects of their culture, which are obstacles to their success. And that may very well be true. Okay. However, putting pressure on people to abandon their traditions and their ideas simply because it's going to help them succeed. So we need to understand that that's a gradual process, and we need to walk them through slowly, step by step, help them understand the realities around them, and empower them to make decisions that are going to improve their life. As opposed to sort of saying, well, you're an American now, and this is how you have to do it. This is how we do it in America. So avoid these type of words that can be hurtful and set up a us against them type of relationship. That's what we want to avoid. And then lastly, it's really, really important to help anyone who comes from a foreign country to identify with others, help them find people they trust, help them find people they relate to, have something in common with. And some of those folks may be other refugees in the community, and some of those folks may be people who are more established here. Somaya, you're up.
Traditional family structure. Member of household will defer decision to their head of household. Head of household is the father figure out of the house matter, but the mother figure is the head of the household inside the house. Women and children may be reluctant to go out unaccompanied and do not typically believe traveling, moving about the city after the sunset is safe. Because of war and fear of not returning once it's dark, which may not be rational, but it's just still a worry in our community. Still, like to this day, my parents believe the same thing. You might see parents shouting at their kids, which they are trying to teach their kids from right to wrong. It's normal to see parents and kids sleep in the same room. It shows a sign of closeness and care. Afghan eat their meal as a family. This is important to them because it gives them a chance to sit together and talk about their days. Afghan try their best to be the good host. Often they offer you a mountain of food, even it's your first time there.
Okay.
Women and children. While Afghan women try to bridge the culture gap with their children, they stress about their children's future, when they will start school, what they need for school, how they get there, and who will pick them up. Also, how they will be successful student. And they stress about like what would happen to the children's future and overall, like what's going to happen. And homesick, missing relative and family members. In Afghan culture, even they get married, they live in the same community as their family. So when they come to US, they lose the connection and they become homesick. Learning a new language is hard, especially with a low literacy like Afghanistan. It's extremely hard for women to learn English. Employment is also another aspect of life. This is difficult for newly arrived refugee mom. In Afghan culture, women do not work, and if they do, it's inside the house. And children. School conflicts, sense of isolation, fitting in versus retaining culture. They want to grow up, achieve their goal, and plan a better future. It's hard for the kids to fit in at any age, but it's harder for refugee children because they have to juggle to fit in to a new society. Children serves as a culture and language translator. So when I was growing up, it meant going to the bank with my mom to help her to open an account. As a child, it was very difficult and it was so stressful for me because I was so worried, like, am I explaining the right stuff? Am I asking the right question? I had high anxiety all the time. I was always worried. I felt like I was growing up so fast.
Great, thanks. Somaya makes an excellent point. So many immigrant children really struggle with anxiety around, having to grow up really quickly and be responsible for their families at a very young age. So holidays and celebrations are also part of culture, I think, for everyone. And this can be an area where, you run into some issues. So we'll go over this real quick. I just tell people to go easy and use caution regarding religious holidays. And even, a lot of people perceive holidays in America as not religious at all. That's just a fun time to be with family and enjoy a custom of American culture. But be aware of the fact that people from Afghanistan and Afghans may perceive these holidays in a completely different manner. So just a fun example for you all is something like Halloween, right? So folks come from another country and they find people dressing up like witches and vampires and zombies. And these things are scary and petrifying, and they don't understand, how can this be fun for children? Okay. And they associate these things with the devil, with black magic, with evil, and some of these customs of ours are even viewed as, blasphemy. So, we have to be a little bit go easy. For us, we're like, hey, we just want to take your kids trick-or-treating. They're going to get some free candy. It's going to be fun. All the kids are going to have fun together. This could be something that is difficult for an Afghan family to understand, and it can cause some offense or some miscommunications. Another aspect of even trick-or-treating, the idea that you would go to a neighbor's house and beg for candy That's like, oh, what type of undignified family would do such a thing? Of course, for us, this is a time-honored tradition of, kids trick-or-treating. So just seeing a very simple miscommunication and cultural gap that can occur. A lot of times it happens around holidays and celebrations. Another big one is Christmas. I have a lot of friends that celebrate Christmas in a religious manner, but I have a lot of friends that for them, it's just a day to exchange gifts and, sing songs and be with family. This isn't something where you might think, what's the big deal? Hey, there's these little kids. Maybe I'm hosting them in my home. Maybe they're my neighbors. Maybe I volunteer to help them. And I want to give them a Christmas gift because I want them to experience Christmas. Doing so might be offensive to someone from Afghanistan. And in general, someone Muslim may be, offended unless they've been in this country for a long time, that, we don't celebrate the birth of Christ. So what are they trying to Christianize me? What are they trying to do? So these things can cause miscommunications, and we need to be really cautious. So go really, really easy and delicate when it comes to celebrating holidays. For you may be thinking that is not my thought process at all, but it can definitely cause some disruptions. Everyone celebrates differently. So, some people may be open to learning new holidays and celebrating new things that they never did before, and they may actually find that fun and exciting. Other people may find this encroaching on their culture or their traditions or their religion, and they might find it hurtful or offensive. So just go easy and ask. I think, was it Sarah who said, ask, don't tell? Just ask, hey, this is our holiday. This is what we celebrate. This is what we believe. What do you believe? What do you celebrate? Would you like to do this with us? Is this something that in your culture you accept? So when you ask those questions, you give that person the chance to tell you, yeah, I think it would be okay if, my kid got a toy for Christmas, so it gives them the opportunity to say yes, or they're going to show you their reservations on their face. Another aspect of this is learn about their holidays. So ask, what holidays do you celebrate? Muslims worldwide, and in particular in Afghanistan, they celebrate 2 Eid holidays per year. Ask them what those are about. An example of a cultural holiday would be like Nowruz, which, some Afghans really celebrate with gusto and excitement, the arrival of spring. And other Afghans feel that this is not an appropriate holiday to celebrate, that, it comes from a pagan background and we shouldn't celebrate that. So just depending on the people and generally also the region or ethnicity, they may or may not celebrate. Birthdays are primarily celebrated for children. Still, I would ask, if you're aware of someone's birthday coming up, I would ask them, is it okay if I bring your child a birthday cake? Would it be okay if I did this? And definitely don't discuss birthdays with adults, because for Afghans, discussing a person's age is really taboo and considered very offensive. So I'm going to apologize in advance if I say anything that seems judgmental or hurtful in any way, because I know that I'm talking about Afghan perceptions of the use of drugs and alcohol and other food restrictions. I'm just doing this because I know a lot of the way that people want to welcome each other is through food. And this sometimes is where we see some of the major conflicts and miscommunications happen. So just keep in mind that, I'm sure that you all know this, but generally speaking, the use of alcohol is generally frowned upon by Afghans. It's seen as something for people who are not of good moral character. It's not seen, they understand that foreigners consume alcohol and it's not necessarily a bearing on their character, but, in their country, it's not something that people do unless they're, maybe they're of a certain element of society. It's seen much more seriously. So for us, in America, marijuana has been legalized. People, use drugs and alcohol for entertainment or, just to have fun or to party or whatever. This is something seen as very bad, very serious, very concerning, very scary, something you don't want your children around. You don't want your children to see it, hear it, smell it, so it's extremely, it has a lot stronger significance than you might understand. I would suggest, and this is just a soft suggestion, this is obviously your life and your home, I would avoid partaking such things in their presence because of how they might misunderstand your use of these items. Unless, especially if you have a strong and good and long established relationship with someone, and then they understand more about you before they see you partaking. I would recommend to store it away from prying eyes. They may find it upsetting that their children may see, you might have a nice liquor cabinet, or you might have a nice little trolley with all the, bottles on it. That might be something that they find problematic. And definitely store it away from food preparation areas like in the kitchen, because alcohol is considered a contaminant. And if it touches anything that, where food might be prepared, they would obviously believe that they cannot consume this food now. So I've actually had families call me and said, like, I can't cook in this person's kitchen because, they also eat pork and they also have alcohol. And what if that touches their pots and pans? And I don't know. I feel insecure about eating food from this kitchen. So again, be cautious about mixing alcohol with food. It's very normal for us to throw some white wine in the shrimp scampi, right? Throw some Baileys in the coffee. These are very normal things for us in America. However, this would make the food unconsumable and would be something that they would want to avoid, not sit at the same table with. I don't have enough time to go into all the details about halal eating and halal food, but just keep in mind a few bullet points. I am working on for Noreen, I'm working on a little cheat sheet, a one-page cheat sheet about halal eating, but just keep in mind no pork products, and that can be anything from lard to bacon to ham to anything like that. There are many products that have pork mixed in, like a lot of meatballs you would buy would also have pork mixed in with the beef and things like that. There is a higher standard of halal called zabiha. And my understanding is that most Afghans adhere to a zabiha halal, which is just basically like in the sense of like kosher, where there's a standard of, a Muslim practitioner that sacrifices the animal. The animal has standards of how humanely it has to be raised, what type of feed it can have, and things like that. The safest bet is to buy things from a halal store that's labeled as halal. So therefore, you don't have to worry about it. It's zabiha, and that's the higher standard. Some Afghans may not hold so closely to that standard, but you're better off taking the safer route so that you don't run into problems. And then just be aware there are many ingredients that contain pork and alcohol, like vanilla, shortening, broth, gelatin, all different things. So you may be thinking, what's the big deal? I'm just going to get them some strawberry jello. That thing may contain gelatin and may create a problem. So I know that there's probably a lot of questions around food, and I'm happy to take them by email or something, but it's sort of wanted to get to some other things. So some of the refugee experience, other people have mentioned some of these things, but obviously these folks are people who are currently going through trauma or have already been traumatized back in their country. And the process of going through trauma is going to continue throughout the resettlement process. Just keeping in mind that these folks are going to have higher levels of depression and anxiety than normal, and that oftentimes they may be undiagnosed. Many Afghans may not be familiar with mental health terminology. The idea of depression is just like, what do you mean I'm depressed? No, I have faith in God. I'm not going to despair. There are cultural taboos around mental health and seeking mental health services. So, telling someone that I think maybe you should see a therapist, they may become very offended. They may think you're telling them that they're mentally ill and they need to be committed or they're crazy. They really only think of mental health in terms of very severe disorders like maybe schizophrenia. They don't really think of anxiety as a mental health disorder, even if it's critical or chronic. Some other behaviors you can see, and I think a few people mentioned some of these, but I'm just going to go over them, would be something like hoarding or stockpiling. So when we do refugee resettlement work, we find a lot of people will come and say, I need this, and they're asking and asking. You're like, I just gave you that like 2 days ago. We just stocked your kitchen. We just got you new clothes. What, you still need more? Is there, what's going on here? What's really going on is this is an emotional response. This person lost everything and has been moved into a, empty apartment. I mean, it's not empty, there's furniture, but you look at your house, look around you and see how many possessions you have that you've accumulated over 5 years, 10 years, 25 years. Losing all of those things create comfort and a sense of home for us. So, refugees are going to be trying to acquire more things to help restore that feeling of having things and being at ease in their environment. So they could be stockpiling also. Many refugees went through very harrowing experiences of loss, and they didn't get a meal for a couple of days, or they couldn't change their clothes, and that can be very, very traumatizing if you're used to living a comfortable lifestyle. So what happens is that they're like, I don't know when I'm going to get food again, so I need to ask again and again and stockpile and save, because what if there comes a time when I can't get this? Okay, and even though they may be settled in the United States, they may still have that emotion, and that's triggering them to stockpile things. So how do we handle that? I mean, we have to be delicate and gentle and just understand where they're coming from. And we can definitely explain and try to work with that problem, but we need to do that with empathy and compassion and know where it's coming from. It's not that they're crazy. It's literally that they're trying to respond to a scenario. Again, you see this with exaggeration, emotional response. So emotional responses can be positive or negative. But you can see people getting heightened emotions. And I mean, this is obviously part of trauma, right? So for example, like the first night, one of these new families that arrived in Worcester came, this gentleman, you know, he had a lot of kids and he had a little girl who was just a year old and she was sick. She had a fever. And we hadn't yet, you know, her benefits hadn't been set up. Nothing had been done. So I said, you know, there's a free clinic at the mosque. Let me take you there. At least, you know, your child can get seen. So we take him to the mosque and, you know, we're waiting while his wife is, you know, being seen with the child. And I'm waiting next to him in the waiting area. And, you know, it's a mosque. So the clinic is on the bottom floor and then, you know, people pray upstairs. So over the loudspeaker comes over the recitation of the Quran. And we're sitting there and all of a sudden he starts sobbing and crying. And I'm like, what's wrong? Is everything okay? And he says, you know, we haven't entered a mosque in 3 years because of bombings, insecurity, ethnic violence. And we just never thought it would ever be safe. Are you sure we're safe? Is it okay? And I had to tell him over and over, you're safe here. Nothing is going to happen to you. You can come here and pray if you want. Your wife and children can come and pray and they can play with other kids. It's okay. But I had to repeatedly assure him before he would, you know, calm down. So he was crying out of happiness, but also fear. So you can see that there can sometimes be really significant emotional responses to things that you may not expect. How people cope with trauma is obviously different. Some people, you know, are sad or depressed or anxious, and other people are going to also experience anger. I think someone else mentioned that. And so that delta between what they were hoping for and expecting in America and what they may be receiving, this can cause some reaction in people where they start becoming demanding. They believe that the more I demand, the more I'm going to get. So to protect my family, to protect myself, to restore my life back to some sense of normalcy, I need to speak up and I need to complain and I need to, you know, so there develops a little bit of a sense of, it sounds like a sense of entitlement. And this can sometimes put people who work with refugees up, you know, off quite a bit because they're like, you know, they should be helpful. They should be grateful. They should be happy. You know, I hear this all the time from people who are volunteering, and it's like, they're not really demanding people. They just think that this is how they can help themselves in this situation that they were never expecting to happen. They have difficulty forming trust with people. I think Amy said they typically either trust everybody or nobody. What we see more of is trusting nobody, you know, that kind of fear. I remember the first time one of the families came and it was late at night and I said, would you like me to take your wife grocery shopping and I'll come back? And they were like looking at me like, you want to take my wife? It's nighttime. It's not safe. Are you sure? No, I don't know. And, you know, so I had a translator talk to them and you know, they said, well, you know, we don't know you. You're not known to us. So we don't know if we can trust you to take our wife grocery shopping, you know? So there's a difficulty creating bonds and trust. And it's so important to help people find people that they know and relate to and build coalitions of different people around them so they can, you know, they're going to find somebody that they're compatible with. And then, you know, it's also very obvious that due to this political environment, you know, there's a lot of distrust in military figures, police figures, law enforcement of any kind is going to be extremely scary for them. Keep that in mind. You know, for us, we teach our kids to say hi to the policemen and hi to the firemen. For people coming new to the country, Afghans especially, they're going to have a lot of distrust with law enforcement. So we need to try to intervene and help and culturally broker the relationships and the interactions with those people to make those things go more smoothly so we don't have crises like I think Sarah mentioned, people getting associated with gangs and whatnot. So I'll leave it at that. I hope I didn't go over time. I couldn't see my clock. I'll leave it there.
You have a whole minute you could have used, Mona. No, that was so helpful and so many really important pieces there. We do have Captain Christopher Bersani here, and he is up next, but certainly if there's more time at the end, I'm sure people have the most questions for the two of you. It's definitely the place where a lot of our knowledge gaps end. So I guess I'm just gonna hand it right on over to you, Dr. Bersani. And I know you don't have slides, right? So
I do not. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for having me. This has been, I haven't been able to catch the whole 2 hours here, but I did catch the last half an hour or so. Very, very informative. Thank you for the background on the cultural differences. It's really helpful. So let me just give you a little bit of a background on my experience and a little bit about what I've seen. I've got some like very basic things I want to go over, and I'm sure some of it you already know, and maybe even been covered today, and I apologize. I was unable to attend the full presentation today, so I don't know exactly what was covered. But so I'm Chris Bersani. I'm the Deputy Regional Administrator for what was the Office of Regional Operations with HRSA. It is now called Intergovernmental External Affairs, but I'm also in the Commission Corps, thus the uniform. So I work, under the Surgeon General's guidance, and I'm one of 6,500 Commission Corps officers. And as with being in the Commission Corps in the Public Health Service, we are often asked to deploy to special missions, usually inside the continental United States, that has to do with public health. And in my case, since I am I'm trained as a clinical psychologist and a neuropsychologist, I am often deployed for behavioral health activities. So that is the case here. So about a month ago, I was asked to come down to Fort Lee, Virginia, which is one of a handful of military bases that are housing Afghan refugees that left abruptly, as was indicated. And our job here was to supply housing and food and shelter and supplies and healthcare to the refugee population while we tried to get them resettled into communities across the nation. And here at Fort Lee, we were able to do that rather expeditiously. In fact, we went from about about 2,000 refugees at one point, and now we're almost down to zero. So we have resettled almost 2,000 Afghan refugees, which we're very, very pleased about. A lot of the other bases are not so fortunate. And so part of the reason that we were successful in getting folks, first of all, let me just back up and say, the accommodations here at Fort Lee for the refugee families were very good. I mean, there's a brand new hotel here on the base. It's a Holiday Inn. And so the accommodations were good, but nobody wants to be stuck in a hotel and have parameters put on them in terms of where they can go for any long period of time. And so that is the situation here. So we had up to 2,000 refugees at one point. And as I said, now we're down to close to zero. I think tomorrow we'll be down to zero. So we'll be able to get everybody resettled. So my role here was to be the behavioral health consultant working with the medical team here. So most of my referrals were through primary care interactions with individuals who came in to get a primary care treatment for something. And it presented itself as perhaps some behavioral health issues involved as well. And so I can tell you a little bit about some of those towards the end here, but I just wanted to also let you know that we were fortunate in that also on this base, because it was a little easier for us to resettle these refugee families because a lot of them were under the SIV program. And I'm not sure if somebody's already gone over that with you, but special immigration visas, which means that people were already in the pipeline for coming to the US through this SIV status, which is different from some individuals who came very quickly and were under more of what they call a parole system sort of thing, which is a little bit more difficult to get everything in order for them to go into a community. So that was an advantage for us as well here at Fort Lee in terms of the population that we had. So we were able to be a little bit more expeditious in getting people resettled into their communities. That SIV program incidentally started back in around 2008 to grant visas to Afghan and Iraqi nationals who worked on behalf of the US government. And many of these SIV holders were interpreters or translators for the US military, assisting American troops in carrying out delicate military operations. So many evacuees coming in the next year are expected to be given SIVs due to their work alongside the US military, but a lot of that wasn't processed yet because of the rapid fall of Kabul. Okay, so I'm just going to. This is a little basic, but this was actually kind of for my own benefit as well. I am definitely not an expert in Afghan culture, and I'm definitely not an expert in refugee experiences. Quite frankly, this is really my first deployment, and being in the public health service over 25 years, directly related to refugees. I have worked with many immigrants. I was deployed down to the border of Mexico this past year to work with unaccompanied children down at the border to assist them, but never in terms of a technical refugee experience such as the one with Afghanistan right now. So I just wanted to make that disclaimer. I am, as I said, trained as a neuropsychologist and clinical psychologist, so I do have a lot of experience with trauma and how that impacts human beings. But as you know, culture plays a big role in people's response to trauma and also treatment for trauma. So I think it's just important to define trauma. There's a lot of ways to define it, but we all know it's a powerful emotional response to a distressing event, such as war, an accident, an unexpected loss of a loved one, or abuse. And in many cases, many of the refugees, patients who I've seen in the past few weeks, certainly have experienced many of those. And this trauma can continue to cause emotional and physical symptoms many years after the events, as referenced before. So, now with refugees, this means that they need to integrate to a new community and culture, and many of them have had very traumatic experiences. And so some of the risk factors involved with responses to trauma that are not positive would include previous trauma, so repetitive experiences with trauma. If the event was completely unexpected and completely out of the blue, again, many folks here have experienced that. If there's repeated occurrences over the course of time, and if you were exposed to trauma as a child, that tends to make you even more prone to adverse reactions to new trauma. And then you are in an environment that is a feeling of being helpless. And certainly, as much as we tried to provide as much as we could for refugees here, certainly there's a feeling of being helpless because they really, in very real terms, do not have a lot of control, unfortunately. And we are trying to give them as much control as possible. But that is something that is out of our control to some extent. And then if there's concurrent stressors, that can also have a negative impact on how people respond to new trauma. And then resiliency limitations. If some people are just more resilient than others, and so therefore they can bounce back a little more quickly or respond well to trauma, respond more efficiently to trauma. Okay, so some of the common refugee experiences that are already indicated that might that may be considered to be traumatic from a definition standpoint is military combat. Certainly, we've seen a lot of men here at Fort Lee who've witnessed or been involved with military combat. We've had civilian unrest and violence. Almost all of them have seen and witnessed that, particularly in the last days of their experiences in Afghanistan. If there's an abrupt separation from loved ones, that's something that most families were split up due to these evacuation priorities. So most of them have experienced abrupt separation from loved ones. We've had, if there's safety and security concerns, and that certainly is something that most of these Afghan families experienced acutely the very end of their stay in Afghanistan, and now are experiencing it again here as they try to readjust to a whole new world. Okay? And then the unknown future, the uncertainty, the lack of control, being in a totally new culture, looking for new employment, new friends, schools. The language is quite different. And so these are all things that most of the Afghan refugees here have experienced. We need to keep all that in mind. And then, as much as we tried to make this a welcoming place and a place that was comfortable. These are temporary quarters, and you're still in a hotel room, oftentimes, 3, 4, 5 other family members. And so that can be very tight quarters and can be very stressful. And, in some cultural senses, what was told to me is that a lot of the men are not necessarily involved in the day-to-day rearing of children. And yet in this environment, everybody's exposed to each other all day long. So there was a lot of adjustment in that regard. And then, symptoms of trauma, and again, I'm sure some of this is going to be repeated from previous speakers, but irritability, crying, excessive sadness, perhaps cognitive dysfunction with difficulties making decisions, headaches, gastrointestinal distress, breathing problems, sleep problems, heightened startle response, jumpiness, angst, that constant state of generalized anxiety, appetite changes, anhedonia, meaning a lack of joy or kind of feeling numb, thoughts of self-harm occasionally, rage, hopelessness. Flashbacks are very common with people who've experienced acute traumatic events, avoidance of situations. We've seen a lot of that here, distressing dreams, irritability, self-blame, emotional numbing, an urge to flee, and panic attacks. Those are all, and that's not an exhaustive list, but those are all symptoms of a trauma response. And one of the things that we try to emphasize here to patients who we did see is, this can be a very normal response to a very abnormal experience. So, there is always a tendency to have some negative connotations to mental health, quote unquote, problems. And so, one of the things we want to put into context for people is that, these are not necessarily mental health problems, although that should also not be something looked upon negatively, but these are oftentimes just normal reactions to very abnormal circumstances. So we try to normalize it. So I do want to speak specifically about some of the challenges with regard to assessment and treatment for particularly the women in the population, because that's the majority of the patients that I saw here were women who were experiencing somatic complaints, things like gastrointestinal distress, breathing problems, chest pain, lower back pain. And we saw a lot of this. Probably 80% of the patients that I saw here were women and women who were experiencing somatic complaints. So from a cultural standpoint, one of the challenges here was that it's difficult to see a female patient individually as a male provider. So culturally, the husband or a father or a brother or a male would be present during an interview or during an assessment. And then in this case, I would also have a translator because I don't speak any of the languages. So oftentimes it would be an assessment with at least 2 other people in the room. So that presents its challenges too, particularly if we expect any kind of domestic issue. So that is certainly a challenge, and we tried to treat that very sensitively and pay close attention to that. And we also had, access to observation outside of the medical facility, because we do have people who are responsible for making sure that all the residents here are safe. We refer to them as guests, that they are safe. So we did have other information. And if anything was suspected that there was any illegal activity going on with regard to domestic activities, that was taken care of from that perspective. But that was definitely a challenge. So some of the observations here from me is that, the women in Afghanistan are the primary caretakers within the family, particularly with regard to children and parents and even siblings. And so they carry a lot of burden and a lot of responsibility. And there is a less, what we would consider, again, we want to be sensitive to, just cultural differences, but from an American perspective, maybe less independence with regard to the women, and, the fact that, fathers or husbands or male siblings would accompany a woman to an appointment like this, made it a little more challenging. There are a few cases that I saw here where the primary complaint was that it was a young or an arranged marriage. So one patient I saw here was 20 years old, had just met her husband 2 weeks ago, and she had during a very rapid departure from Afghanistan, she left her family of origin behind and is essentially living with somebody who really she did not know very well beforehand. And now they're living together in a hotel room, essentially, and she was certainly missing her family and having serious adjustment problems with regard to that. So that's kind of a sort of a typical case that we see. We see a lot of young women with arranged marriages who are here without their family of origin. And there are also some, again, from an American perspective, like entertainment restrictions. So at times, women were not allowed to watch movies or do some reading or do sports activities. And so some of the things that we might prescribe in terms of things that might be beneficial for mental health were restricted in that regard. So we had to, be cognizant of that and respect that as well. And then, I think this is true certainly in American society as well, but particularly with women that we've seen here is that, there are some kind of unacceptable emotions to be displaying. So things like anger or hostility or frustration. And so this is, part of the reason that there would be somatization, that is kind of physical display of symptoms that may be related to trauma. Okay. And then the other special population, of course, would be children, and children's responses to trauma varies greatly. But children across the world seems that are very resilient by nature, and actually, quite frankly, not many children were brought to our attention in the medical through the medical referral process here. But that does not mean, of course, that children, we're not suffering from the ill effects of trauma. And certainly once they're resettled, this is something that's really going to be very important that people pay attention to. Some other cultural issues. One patient that I saw, her father-in-law had just passed away. And so they were in a state of mourning. And so some of the things that I would maybe typically recommend for her to do in order to decrease some of the symptoms of anxiety and depression she was having, she was not able to do because there were certain rules about the mourning process, and she was unable to engage in entertaining activities and that sort of thing to distract her. So that was her particular religious system belief. So, and then evidence-based interventions, other evidence-based interventions have their limitations as well. In general, there's a limited emphasis in terms of things that I would typically prescribe that are non-medicinal. So things such as exercise as therapy. We had limited access for people to, say go to a gym, but that's not something that typically a lot of the patients that I saw would be engaging in on a regular basis anyhow. Meditation is something else that we frequently would recommend in this situation. Mindfulness and that sort of thing. And in a religious context, many people I saw here could relate to that, but it wasn't kind of exactly the evidence-based meditation or mindfulness that we are familiar with here in the States. So again, just something to be aware of, and we're sensitive to that fact. Many, particularly the women, were not literate, so were unable to read. So if there was any psychoeducational material, a lot of times what I would do is I would hand the interpreter some of that material, and I would ask the interpreter to talk about what was on the page and talk about resources that are out there once they get resettled, so that they could have access to resources once they are resettled. But literacy certainly was a challenge as well. on a very positive note, one of the things that I'm always concerned about with people who are experiencing trauma, and if they are having major symptoms of depression or anxiety, particularly if they're thinking they have some thoughts of self-harm, is I always worry about drugs and alcohol, and that certainly was not an issue at all here. Almost all of the people that I saw here are not, never consume alcohol at all, or any other drugs other than nicotine and caffeine. One of the things that we do, this is just sort of parenthetical, but sometimes with people who are experiencing trauma, there are what they call therapy dogs that come to some of these deployments that I've had when people have been experiencing trauma. And that's not something that's necessarily appropriate with this culture. Most families there do not have dogs as pets and consider that to be, it's not something typical in their culture. All right, so what would typically be some things that I would recommend or do treatment with in these situations? And of course, since people here are not here for the long term, it's not appropriate necessarily to implement some of these anyhow. But, as I mentioned before, some of these would be challenging given some of the cultural challenges. But cognitive behavioral therapy, exposure therapy, medication, eye movement desensitization treatment, and just desensitization treatment in and of itself, and some group therapy. Those are all things that are typically considered to be evidence-based treatments for adverse reactions to trauma. So what I primarily did was educate people about what these treatments are. And again, this was through an interpreter. So, you're doing the best you can. But educate people about what these things are and make them aware that these will be available to them in the community to which they go. And that I think it's really important that they consider this as what they have gone through is a very difficult, traumatic situation. And that we know through our research here that some of these treatments can be very helpful in alleviating symptoms and leading to more gratifying life. So some other thoughts about placement, and I wish I had caught the whole discussion beforehand, but because I really am interested in the refugee experience once they get resettled into their communities. But some things that come to my mind as I say goodbye to a lot of the guests here is, I think healthcare is going to be huge, and so one of my favorite topics, federally qualified health centers, since they're a HRSA grantee. I think federally qualified health centers are going to be really, really important for refugees to be connected with when they get to their community, so that they have the full range of great healthcare that is supplied at FQHCs across the country. Community mental health centers as well are also important. They also are a safety net for behavioral health, for services that maybe FQHCs cannot supply. And then school-based health, I think, is going to be really important for the children getting into our school systems. I think it's going to be really important that we identify and treat early on and do some preventive treatment for children who may be experiencing the ill effects of trauma. And, really kind of, as is often the case, I think, with refugee families, is the children really become the translators and the educators of the family. So to me, the children are really a very, very important part of, addressing a lot of the situational factors that will face the family, because in some ways there's a role reversal and children become sort of the leaders of the family in some way as they grow into adolescence. So I think it's really important that we make sure that those resources are there for them.
Thank you so much, Bersani. I don't want to cut you off.
That's it. I'm done. Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity, and I really enjoyed hearing previous speakers. Very, very helpful and very informative. Thank you.
We will share the recording with you for sure. And again, we're so grateful, and your staff were super helpful with putting resources in the chat. And it's a good segue because you talked about some of the gendered issues, and attorney Melanie Shapiro is here to talk more about her efforts. So thank you so much, Melanie. Turning it over to you.
Hi, everybody. So I'm Melanie Shapiro. I'm an immigration attorney in Massachusetts. I have an office in Worcester, and I've been leading something called the Afghan Feminist Refugee Project. So I've been collaborating with some feminists internationally in Poland, Germany, the UK, and one other in the US. Basically, after the US left Afghanistan in August 31st, and then we've been trying to work with others to pick up the pieces. And I started this work with one pro bono case, and now I have 300 people on my list and growing every day. I'm working with some ex-military on the ground who are doing, bringing people to safe houses, and who are working on evacuations. So I'm coordinating the safe houses, evacuations, mental health support, sponsors, housing, and legal services for this group. And all of this is donation based. And so my group is looking for people who are willing to sponsor somebody for humanitarian parole, which is one of the forms of relief that that are available to Afghans. As you know about the Afghan parolees are coming in. So on August 31st, USCIS, which is US Citizenship and Immigration Services, stopped all processing of humanitarian parole requests. They previously had 1,200 applications per year from all countries, and as of a couple of weeks ago, there are 26,000 petitions for humanitarian parole for Afghans that are pending. They have hired 44 new officers, so we're hoping that the processing can go a lot smoother. If you have any sort of questions, I encourage you to put them into the chat. So I just want to talk a little bit about the people that I'm helping, about the work we're doing, and ways that you can get involved. So as I mentioned, I am trying to coordinate people to volunteer for mental health support. Many of the people that I'm working with are, so the population I'm working with is many women, vulnerable women, members of the LGBT community, female journalists in general, really. We have been focusing on females, but have broadened that up. So a lot of professional women, lawyers, doctors, judges, and members of the former Afghan government. So a lot of people are experiencing trauma, obviously from what they've already been through, but also they're terrified. They're hiding, they're moving their places around. We've had crisis situations where we've had to move people to safe houses. And so, for example, we had a woman a week and a half ago who was gang raped by the Taliban. And now, because of the cultural issue with honor killings, her father is trying to find her, to kill her, to restore the family's honor, as well as her mother, because of, trying to kill both of them. So, and that's a situation where there's a crisis, and we've moved her to a safe house with her mother. But this is someone who needs mental health support. We have people who are suicidal. So what I have some volunteer mental health professionals, but of course there's kind of an issue with the licensing. So I'm setting up kind of a buddy system. So a lot of the people who are sponsoring our clients is basically someone who's in the US who has to be a citizen or a lawful permanent resident to fill out some paperwork. I put the link in the chat. I'm going to put it in again, just in case you didn't see it. But this is on a part of my website that talks a little bit about the work we're doing, and about FAQs for people who are interested in being sponsors. And it's really very easy to do. There's virtually no liability to you. The only way that you would be liable is if the government mistakenly gives benefits to Afghan parolees, which would never happen because they just passed the Afghan Appropriations Act that is, statutorily going to give benefits to Afghan parolees. So it's very simple. It does not require any financial contribution. There is a donate link on the website as well. If you can contribute something, or someone who might be able to, that'd be great. Every case that we file for humanitarian parole, each person has to pay $575 for a filing fee. So the money that we're using for these cases is going towards their filing fees, legal services, plane tickets. We paid for someone's TOEFL exam so that they can apply for a student visa, sent study materials. My group is also going to be working on dropping food and medicine into the provinces. So, all of this goes directly to help Afghans. I know that a lot of the work that this group is talking about is helping those who are already here or who are arriving, but there's so many that are left behind. I have members of the LGBT community. I have one man who was hiding in a warehouse in Mazar with no electricity, no food, and he had been attacked by the Taliban. They poured boiling water on him. I have another trans woman who was burned. So these are the kinds of stories that I'm getting every day. And so we're triaging people's situation to see who is at the most risk, who has already been physically harmed, who is most high profile, that it's not like they can move somewhere because everybody knows who they are. So that's, kind of what I'm working on right now. I'm trying to also communicate with other countries to accept people like as a lily pad country so that we can process stuff. So I'm in talks with St. Vincent and the Grenadines. We're looking at the Philippines. Part of the issue with people who are applying for humanitarian parole is that USCIS prioritizes people who are already outside of Afghanistan. So in order to complete their humanitarian parole processing, we have to get them somewhere else. And that's really hard, and somewhere that has a US embassy. So we had some women in Iran who we evacuated to Germany, and they can complete processing there. There's no US embassy in Iran. It's difficult to get into Pakistan, though they just reopened the country. So, everything is changing every second, which is very stressful for everybody involved. The women are desperate. I get messages, dozens of messages every day begging for help. And, they're really desperate. And because, some of them say, I'd rather kill myself than be caught by the Taliban. So, there's a lot of mental health issues that are going on. We have some of them that I think somebody was mentioning it before, that like culturally, they think that if they keep emailing and demanding, that something's going to happen. But there's just a bottleneck right now. One of the other issues is that there's been a bunch of people who have been evacuated to the UAE, but the UAE won't take anybody else because these people are now stuck there. So part of the work too is trying to get people moved from the UAE to other places so that we could bring more people. But so what I'm doing on the state side is I have about 26 people, legal people. I have basically everybody in my firm working on these cases. And then I have some volunteer attorneys. I have 8 students that I'm mentoring on these cases, in just paralegals, and everybody is kind of like a ragtag group of people who've stepped up because we don't want to turn our backs on the Afghans. And then the ex-military people that I'm working with are all people who have served in Afghanistan and are retired, or, some former Marines and Navy SEALs and so forth. So, yeah, that's pretty much that. I'd love to answer any questions that you guys have, though.
Do we want to, I guess we could probably let Noreen do her piece, and then if people can stay beyond that, that would be amazing, because I know we didn't get to ask questions. There's so much good information. And Melanie, that is just amazing, the work that you're doing. I'm so grateful for just the importance of it, and it's awesome.
Thanks.
Noreen, I know you can jump on in. I can, when I find you, I will spotlight you. Mel, shall I keep your spotlight on, Melanie? All right.
Okay, so thank you so much. I really appreciate being a part of this, and I am going to do a screen share. But while I do that, I will invite everybody on this call to take a deep breath in And a deep breath out, because this is really heavy information. And when you feel it in your heart, it's very hard to just sit with that. So please take a deep breath while I bring up my screen share. So, I guess I get to share a little bit of the good news, and that is that we have so many people in this community who care, and so many people in Worcester who want to be involved and supportive. And so my role has been to try to coordinate some of that interest and enthusiasm and make it as productive and constructive as possible. So we have an organization that is essentially a coalition, a loose coalition called Worcester Together. And it's made up of community funders, along with community organizations, agencies, and individuals, private philanthropy, family foundations, the United Way of Central Massachusetts, and the city of Worcester, all in partnership to try to plan how the community can be responsive and be a fertile ground for our newly planted families who are coming to this community. So how do we create a warm welcome and a good place for families to be? So, of course, there we go. This is just an overview of the larger group. So this Worcester Together Afghan Resettlement Response Group is convened by the mayor of the city of Worcester and includes community leaders from across sectors, many of whom are on the call today, some of whom no doubt will listen later. We have from that group that's doing the larger coordination, and it does include, and a hats off to our Central Massachusetts legislative delegation, our congressman's office, Congressman McGovern, Senator Harriet Chandler, and others who are supporting this work in a variety of ways and advocating for some of the changes that Melanie talked about and some of the benefits that people are receiving and will be receiving in the future as a part of the refugee program. We have several working groups. So we have the Worcester Public Schools Education Working Group, which is focused on getting children enrolled in school and making sure they have a successful enrollment, that their parents understand how the education system works and that they're enrolled in a timely manner. We have a Refugee Health Working Group, which includes our 2 federally qualified health centers that Dr. Bersani referenced. That's the Family Health Center of Worcester and the Edward M. Kennedy Community Health Center, and UMass Memorial Healthcare, working with the 2 refugee resettlement organizations, RIAC, which is the Refugee and Immigrant Assistance Center, and Accentria Care Alliance. So they work together to make sure that those refugee health assessment visits happen in a timely manner and that people get enrolled and connected with primary care and behavioral health care in the community as quickly as possible. We also have a new partnership to the legal concerns with the Worcester County Bar Association, and Jeff Spofford as the president, Gina Platonino and Ben Rudolph for the Community Engagement Committee of the Worcester County Bar Association are convening lawyers from across the region to volunteer their services to complete the humanitarian parolee applications on behalf of individuals who are in our community. And that's some of the work that Melanie was describing, and the Bar Association is taking a coordinating role to help us with that. We have our first meetings with refugees this week on Thursday to start to provide that assistance. And we look forward to working with everyone to make sure that those services are accessible and that we are also fundraising locally to help support the fees. Many of these individuals are here in the community by themselves. And I've heard some questions, which since we're talking about being sensitive, I've heard some people question, why did the men leave their families behind? And I just want to caution people, this was not a choice situation. This was not people planning, I'll go first and you can follow. I mean, this was a mad rush at the airport of people trying to get out. And there are many families that were separated. There are families that were working with the US already and were evacuated on earlier flights. The men went out and the families had paperwork to follow, but could not get on an airplane in Kabul. And so no one abandoned their families. They're very traumatized by the separation and extremely concerned about some of the conditions that you've heard about. So this family reunification effort is so important. We're working with Mass Hire to help coordinate employers who have job opportunities and want to offer those to refugees, and make sure that we're also able to help refugees identify their skill sets and apply for jobs that take advantage of some of their expertise and technical knowledge. We have a new partnership that you'll be hearing about soon between Worcester Together and the Chamber of Commerce around housing. We have such a shortage of affordable housing in Worcester. We're actually working with the Chamber to help identify units that might be available for refugee families. And we're anticipating we need 150 apartments in Worcester to be available to house people on a permanent basis. And so we're looking at short-term housing arrangements of people who have a room or who have an in-law apartment or are willing to host a family on the short term, and then long-term apartment placements that are affordable, where families can be moved into and begin their lives over here. And then we have a very active volunteer engagement and welcoming work group that has so many wonderful people on it who are helping pick up refugees at the airport, are working on providing and coordinating food and clothing, and they're offering language and cultural resources. And we heard from Somaya and Mona today as a part of that. And then we're trying to work on promoting and getting training resources out to the broader community so that people have an opportunity to learn. So Trauma Training Tuesdays is one of those resources. And as we have other opportunities, we will tie those in. This gives you just a sense of some of the other organizations and the way in which we're trying to think about these particular needs of welcoming and settling people in the community. The apartment setups, the Worcester Area Refugee Ministry has done a tremendous job. And I think I've misnamed their organization. I think it's now the Welcoming Alliance for Refugee Ministry. And WARM is providing volunteers to do apartment setups and cleaning apartments that are identified so that when people get there, they're actually coming into a home that's ready for them. And that's done with the help of the Fresh Start Furniture Bank in Hudson, which is where we are directing people to make donations. And we're starting a new relationship with HECMA, which is the Higher Education Collaborative of Central Massachusetts, to have groups of college students help with that furniture move-in. We've been negotiating around clothing with the Salvation Army for vouchers and Andy's Attic at Worcester Public Schools. We're working with Facebook to try to set up a marketplace where people who have items they want to donate can post them, and then refugees and refugee agencies can go and identify those items. And then we're getting kids enrolled in the WIC program as early as possible to provide that nutrition support for families. And Ansaar is providing us assistance around culturally appropriate foods and helping families identify where they can go shopping and do community engagement. And to try to coordinate all of this so that it doesn't become everybody has to call me and I become a bottleneck, or everybody has to call Mona. We've established a website, and this website is going to go live this week. And so these are just some preview images of it. I'm going to just share with you the website briefly. So I'm going to switch over. We're going to take another deep breath real quick. And
Noreen, I'll get you all this link and the materials that I have too for that website. So I know a lot of people wanted access to everything that was shared here. So
thank you.
We can have you the one.
So this is the website. There's a little bit of, and I'll give you a 1-minute overview and then I'll stop talking. It's a little bit about Worcester Together, which explains the coalition, the work that they've been doing for the past several years, and the collaborating partners who are involved in this response. It also gives you ideas about how to help. So instead of having to make phone calls around to find out where to be helpful, you can come here and look at the various ways to participate in helping. And so you can donate furniture through the furniture bank. You can volunteer with agencies, including providing transportation. You can donate your travel miles. This is a little known problem in refugee resettlement that families have to pay for their own tickets. They pay the government back for their travel. So we can offset that by donating our mileage to Miles for Migrants. And then there are ways to donate to the agencies directly here. So that can link you to the 2 organizations that are providing resettlement services, as well as organizations that are helping with that process. Just to put it all in one place, make it easier. Instructions for how to donate clothing and where to drop them off at Andy's attic. Housing options, where to donate household goods, how to offer employment, how to offer pro bono legal services. And so this form is what the lawyers fill out. And when they hit submit, it goes directly to the Worcester County Bar Association, and they verify that this is a lawyer in good standing, and can then coordinate the assistance provided to the refugees. And then co-sponsor a family. This is a new model of resettlement. It's a new old model. It's back to the old way of doing things, where you actually can directly engage in supporting a family to rebuild a life. And that takes a team. That takes a team approach of either a large family or a group of neighbors who want to get together and provide enough support to help a family through their first year in the United States. That's helping resettle them, help them find housing and a job, help them make new friends. And so when you click on these links, it takes you out to where you can sign up to co-sponsor a family. And so I'm going to stop sharing now and welcome everyone to join us, and thank all the previous speakers and many of you on the call for caring so deeply about this situation and for helping. Thank you.
That was so great. Thank you all so much. All of our presenters. Wow, a lot of stuff. I didn't see that anyone put anything specific for questions in the chat. You know, obviously everybody wants to be able to get this information going forward. It's like we know about trauma, even though we're not traumatized, it's hard to take in a lot of really emotional information. So we're so glad that everyone's making this available. Oh, Meg has her hands up, Mona. Let me know. Meg, you can unmute and jump right in, please. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. This is Meg Gallo from the Refugee and Immigrant Assistance Center. I just wanted to say thank you all so much for putting this together, and for everybody's expertise and time that was lent to this presentation. The presenters have been just extraordinary, spot on. This has been so heartening, just fantastic, really fantastic for the community. Thank you very, very much. And I just wanted to add that so much of what people have spoken about today is ringing so true to what we are seeing. We've had about 52 people come through our agency to Worcester since October 5th. And the level of concern and fear and worry regarding their families that are back in Afghanistan cannot be emphasized enough. And every single person who is arriving is going to be submitting an HB 131 application. Everybody's going to be seeking help to help try to get help for their families or get their families out of Afghanistan. Every single one's telling us stories about their families being threatened, being beaten, going into hiding, being interrogated. So we're hearing this directly from the people that are here now in Worcester. Thank you so very much for putting this together. I think we should do it all again in another month or two. I was just listening and thinking of so many more people. Would be fabulous to share this with even further. But thank you so much.
And Meg, thank you for what you're doing. The direct work you're doing is amazing and so appreciated. And it's terrifying, but important to hear how that is going for people. I don't know. Anyone else wanted to jump
Is
in?
there-
Go ahead.
Since we are at a distance, we will probably be mostly using our local medical providers who have stepped up, but they would very much like to have some sort of a cultural guidance cheat sheet. Aside from us having asked them to gender match providers, we really don't have any inside scoop on dealing with routine medical exams and that sort of thing.
Noreen, is your website going to be the best place to go then as we develop? I know there were a couple of things, cheat sheets shared, resources shared.
Yes.
It sounds like Noreen's website is going to be the best place for us to house those so people can continue to access them when they need them.
I really appreciate that, because we had initially anticipated building a, learn more here kind of page where you would have resources, but we thought no one would look at it. So if there's an interest, we will definitely put up that learn more section and make sure that those resources get up there. Thank you.
Is there a medical cheat sheet available already, Noreen, or do we need to think about developing it?
No, we don't have a medical cheat sheet. There were resources shared in the chat in terms of journal articles and some federal resources that are available that speak to it, but not in the way that I think we're describing.
Mona, another one for you.
I know, Mona, we could keep you busy all year.
Sure, I don't mind. I took the day off from my normal work so I could do this, because I otherwise would never be able to spend 2 hours in one place. But yeah, if there's any other questions, but I think I do have some medical professionals in my network who are culturally aware. They've been working with refugees for years and are even from, Asia. So I could try to develop a cheat sheet. It might take a few weeks, but if it's something that doesn't exist yet, I guess it'd be better than having nothing, right?
So much. Everything we do now, really hopefully prevents more trauma for people. That's our intention, is to just keep people from having repeat trauma in these systems that are supposed to help them. So all of our work towards that end, we can't even imagine how it'll pay off. And we're really, really appreciative to be in a kind, caring community that really does want to be welcoming and embrace people when they've had so much trauma. I think, well, we're already a little bit past our time. We're so super grateful again. We will get that link out as soon as possible. It kind of goes through a Clark process and comes back. And everyone is free to share. It'll be on Facebook, Noreen's website, and thank you all just so much for being here. We really appreciate it and hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
Okay, everyone.